Salamun alaikum. So last time we left the story with amazing details regarding the plotting that was going on between Yusuf and Yaqub against the siblings, or unbeknownst to the siblings. Today, inshallah, we're going to see that the siblings have their chance to start getting back at Yusuf and trying to accomplish the mission they set for themselves, and perhaps, as we will see, to continue what they started so long ago to get rid of Yusuf, and in the process maybe get rid of the younger brother too. We're going to see that the plot is getting more and more interesting and more sophisticated, and inshallah we're going to cover quite a few details regarding some methodological issues in this segment. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. This is part 10 of the series on the story of Yusuf. So in this segment, we're going to see that the brothers fail in their first attempt as they entered Misr, each person entering separately as we saw. But they failed as we saw, and therefore they're going to try different things. Not only they're going to try different things once, they're going to try things again and again and again. Remember, Yaqub gave them the instructions: attain to your mission using multiple pretexts, multiple approaches, different ways to get to succeed in your mission. And still, at the end, Yaqub gave them a warning: وَمَا أُغْنِي عَنْكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. I don't protect you, I don't guarantee that you're going to succeed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will decide if you're going to succeed or not. So we're going to see that there is a true battle of wits that's going to start between Yusuf and the brothers. Where? In Misr. So this is their second trip to Misr. They're armed with the plan that Yaqub gave them. The first aspect of the plan failed when Yusuf grabbed the younger brother and talked to him separately, away from the siblings, away from the brothers, and the brothers did not know anything about that part. Remember, this presentation is at the level of a graduate school course, so please take it seriously. There's a lot of material, as we always say. Please watch all the prior episodes. You're not going to benefit if you just jump into this one without knowing a lot of the background that got us to this point in time. Yes, you are expected to work hard. I am looking forward to your comments and your questions, but you have to put the effort to really try to understand the sophisticated details that are included in the story of Yusuf. Get out of your head the flat Disney-like story that we were told in all the books of tafsir. In general, all the books of tafsir followed the same simple-minded plot that they brought in from the corrupted version of the Torah, the story of Joseph over there. So get that out of your head. Focus on the very, very complex, advanced, intelligent, genius-like planning and strategizing between the various warring parties in this story. It's really a phenomenal story, as you will continue to see, and we're getting into more and more meat as we go forward. I hope you're taking notes. I hope you're keeping track of all your questions, and inshallah we will discuss them as we go forward. In this segment, we only have 3 ayat, 70 to 72, but we have something very important. For the first time on this channel, we're going to discuss clear Zubur, clear concealment instrument that is right there in front of us. We have discussed it before, but now we're going to analyze it from the point of view that it is an instrument of concealment used deliberately by the Quran. That's going to be in Ayah 1266. So we're looking back a little bit, and then we're going to go forward to Ayah 70 through 72. So we'll get started with a quick reminder about Ayah 1266. The context of this ayah is when Yaqub is compelled by the siblings, by his children, to give them the younger brother to go back to Misr, a second trip, in order to obtain the trade. Of course, that happened after their lie was uncovered, and the members of the household discovered that Yusuf had inserted and concealed the stock and trade in their private travel packs. So now Yaqub is forced to agree, but he's gonna milk it. He's gonna add to the situation whatever conditions he can add to at least ensure that they will behave in the best way possible. And the only thing he can ask them for is to ask them for an oath, and they give him an oath. So he says, قال لن أرسله معكم حتى تؤتوني موثقا من الله لتأتنني به إلا أن يحاط بكم فلما آتوه موثقهم قال الله على ما نقول وكيل. I've explained this before a couple of segments back earlier in this series. I'm going to go over it very quickly, and then we're going to focus on the Zubur aspect in this ayah. This is something brand new. This is something I've never discussed before on this channel. So I hope you take advantage of it and you start reflecting on so many other aspects of concealment that we're going to discuss going forward in this surah. So the translation is, Yaqub said, I shall not send him, meaning the younger brother, with you until you give me a solemn oath, as if it was Allah taking the oath from you, that you will return to me, bringing him with you. He's talking here about Yusuf. We're going to see that this is a brand new type of interpretation that none of the translators or the interpreters have got it right before. We're going to discuss this in a lot more details, but for full details of why لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ refers exclusively, unambiguously to Yusuf, please look at the segment titled YT67. It is to be found on the channel page, and we provided full detailed explanation for that verb with a lot of examples, a lot of linguistic analysis, a lot of markings from the Quran, contextual evidence from the Quran, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go through that, but the evidence clearly prove that Yaqub is talking about Yusuf, and the siblings, meaning the children of Yaqub, understood this very clearly. And yet we're going to see all the books of translation, all the books of tafsir got this interpretation of this word wrong. They misunderstood this word. So you bring him, Yusuf, not bring him back, bring him. He's not here right now. You bring him unless you are outmaneuvered, outsmarted, so to speak. And thus when they gave him their solemn oath, he agreed and said, Allah is the arbiter over what we say. By the way, this last sentence in here, I urge you to go look at all the translations and you see how they got this one wrong too. Anyway, we discussed all of this in segment YT67. Please refer back to that. So I need to say a couple of things and then we're going to jump into the Zubur. First, without understanding this critical evidence about who the object of لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ is, which we said is Yusuf, without understanding this critical evidence, the siblings' second trip to Misr becomes simply superfluous. It is not adding to the plot. In other words, in the traditional story, and go back and revisit the whole traditional story if you want to check for yourself. If you take out the whole second trip in their traditional story and you go directly to the third trip, you would be fine. You wouldn't miss major aspects of the story because their traditional story is wrong. Whereas in the Quranic story, this aspect, which is لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ, which as we said is the prime and secondary directive or mission for the brothers for going to Misr on a second trip. The prime directive was to identify Yusuf. The second directive was to bring him to his father, to bring him, not bring him back, to bring him to his father. That aspect of their mission is the heart of their second trip. So in the traditional interpretation, the whole second trip is simply stuffing and superfluous. وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. They did not ascribe to Allah His due reverence. In here, in our interpretation, every single word, every aspect of the story is moving the plot forward and is adding value and meanings and knowledge and lessons and major morals that we're learning. The second note here is that absent this critical evidence, the traditional story is unable to answer so many questions. In other words, without understanding لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ, there are so many questions they can't answer. And therefore, by uncovering this single critical evidence, we're able to answer so many questions, and the story is seated properly, and therefore the second trip becomes very, very, very relevant. Perhaps a very, very important scene as part of the whole story, which helps the whole story becomes more fleshed out. You will see for yourself, inshallah, as we develop more and more of the story, you will get to appreciate how important the events during this second trip are. So we get to the issue of why did all the interpreters and translators fall into the mistake of translating لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ as to bring the younger brother back to me. Why did they make that mistake? And by the way, this is uniformly across all translations and, like I said, across all books of tafsir, except perhaps one, and I've mentioned him before. So therefore, why did they make that mistake? Where did they trip? How did the Quran entrap them into going in the wrong direction? Remember, the Quran does this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, يُضِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the Quran for those who have the wrong assumptions or doing the rushed interpretation, al-ajila, to go astray, to slip past the important critical evidence and the ayat, and therefore end up with the wrong understanding, and therefore not have a solid ground to develop the understanding of the vocabulary and the lexicon for understanding the rest of the Quran. Very, very serious mistake. It's not as simple missing one verb. No, you missed a critical pivot in the whole story, which led you to not appreciate major chunks of the story, and therefore the whole story was lost, was not really well understood. So why did they do this? How did they fall into this trap? The answer is very simple, and I'm going to explain it, and you're going to see it immediately and say, wow. The answer is the third person pronoun in the verb ursilahu. In the verb ursilahu refers to the younger brother, whereas the third person pronoun in لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ refers to أخيه, meaning Yusuf, in Ayah 1264. What am I talking about? Let's look very carefully at this text, and I'm going to enlarge it so you can see it right in front of you, and I want you to pay attention. قال, Yaqub said, لَنْ أُرْسِلَهُ, I'm not going to send him. This who in here refers to the younger brother, clearly. With you, معكم, حتى تؤتوني موثقا من الله, until you give me an oath, a solemn oath, as if it's Allah taking it from you. لَتَأْتُنَّنِي bihi, again this same pronoun in here, bihi, ursilahu, the third person pronoun attached to a verb, refers to a third person, an absent person. In this case, it is the younger brother. Fair, that's well understood. What about this one? The Quran entrapped those who are rushing the interpretation. And they thought, okay, this third person pronoun is the younger brother. Therefore, this third person pronoun must be the same younger brother. And that's the trap. The trap here is that someone who's rushing and not really paying attention, what does تَأْتُنَّنِي bihi mean? The phrasal verb, as we talked about in YT67, they fell into that trap. They didn't slow down. They didn't take the akhirah route, the way of really understanding how the Quran uses such terms, not how the 7th century Arabs use such terms. So that's a superficial interpretation of why they made such mistake. But there is more. So before we review the details of this Zubur, I want to show you just quickly that all the translations used bring him back to me, 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 return him to me. Again, this is referring clearly to the younger brother. Bring him back to me. They're all talking about the younger brother. And the Arabic interpretations, tafsir, all say the same thing, including M.A.S. Abdul Halim, which is the Oxford translation, which is, in my opinion, the worst translation we have in the market today. The most dangerous translation that I would never recommend to anyone is this translation. Unfortunately, there are some major channels that consider this the utmost, most relevant translation. Wrong. They're absolutely wrong about this one. Anyway, we go on with answering this question. How did everyone miss this? And this is the important Zubur in 1266. As I said, the third person pronoun in the verb ursilahu is different than the third person pronoun in لَتَأْتُنَّنِي bihi. This represents a crystal clear example of misdirection by the Quran. Misdirection, yes, misdirection. So remember, For a magician, he's doing something with this hand, and at the same time he's doing something else with the other hand, and he wants you to focus on this one. He's misdirecting you from what he's doing with the other hand. This is exactly what the Quran is doing. So he sets you up with a simple pronoun, very easy to understand sort of sentence. لَنْ أُرْسِلَهُ مَعَكُمْ. I'm not going to send him with you. Talking clearly about the younger brother. لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ. You bring him back to me. Well, it fits. It is easy to recognize that this is the same. No, the Quran just tricked you. This is called a misdirection. It's a clear example of misdirection. So the Quran got you to focus on the verb أُرْسِلَهُ, while at the same time he's slipping in لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ, referring to somebody else. This is also an example of concealment. Why? Because Yusuf is not mentioned at all in 66 and 65. There is a mention to أخيه in 64, 2 ayat earlier. Too far for an average person who is really not paying attention and oblivious and just reciting and enjoying the sound of the Quran to really pay attention. But if you're really sitting and observing and being really careful, you understand that this pronoun could be referring not to the near referent, but to a much further referent. That's concealment. He's hiding it in plain sight. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using Zubur, concealment, right in front of our eyes. This is the second aspect of why they tripped, why they made that mistake, why everybody missed this. The third aspect is the Quran disregards the 7th century Arab poets' rules. What are these rules? The rules are that the pronoun refers back to the nearest noun, the nearest referent. In this case, it is the same as this one, which is the younger brother. So according to the Arab poets, this is how they're trained. When they read poetry, you're referring to the nearest noun, the nearest applicable masculine noun that could fit bihi, and they fell into that trap. Why? Because they're starting their enterprise of interpreting the Quran with the assumption that this is just like our language, our poetry, the type of things that we speak. Allah is using our language. This is their assumption. Wrong, false. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reducing their ego to something that is clearly very obvious against what they thought. And they all tripped and fell into that trap. So how did everyone miss this? Because they started with their wrong assumptions about the Quran, and they did not ascribe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala his due reverence, where he told us specifically that every single messenger has been sent with bayinat, instruments of extracting evidence, and zubur, methods of concealing the truth or concealing the insight, so that only those who are muttaqun, disciplined, diligent, take the time, seek the akhirah in their interpretation, only those people can learn to uncover the zubur, to unravel the hur, so to speak, and really understand what's going on. I hope this is clear. This is beautiful. This is amazing. I always feel excited when I discover something new like this, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us immediate evidence of how small we are and how magnificent the capabilities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here, right there in front of your eyes, we have 1400 years of failures of every single person who attempted to interpret this ayah, and they all failed, even though the evidence is so unambiguously presented in the Quran that the meaning of this verb refers to Yusuf, not to the younger brother. So now we move to ayah 1270. So remember, now they have arrived in Misr. Yusuf has picked up his younger brother, talked to him, etc., etc. Now the siblings have figured out that they have been outsmarted by Yusuf. They entered separately from each other, each one alone, etc., etc., and still Yusuf has not come forth. Yusuf did not allow them to identify him. As we said before, because the plot was originally conceived by himself. He is the one who gave the original idea to Yaqub, and Yaqub taught them how to execute the plan, while Yaqub knew they're not going to succeed. So the ayah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فلما جهزهم بجهازهم جعل السقاية في رحل أخيه ثم أذن مؤذن أيتها العير إنكم لسارقون. So after he, Yusuf, provided them with what they needed, جهزهم بجهازهم, the same expression we saw earlier during their first trip. And now we're being set up. We are being set up. We are being set up. Pay attention. To expect the same thing. And of course the same thing happened. But now something slightly different is going to happen. So watch and pay attention. جعل السقاية في رحل أخيه. He, through his servants, without knowing that the siblings were watching them, concealed the drinking utensils in his younger brother's travel pack. There's a lot of information in here. We're going to see a lot more evidence. But basically, Yusuf this time, through his servants, of course, he's not going to go do it himself, but without knowing that the siblings were watching. Why do I say this? You're going to see this for yourself in just a few seconds. ثم, after a while later, أذن مؤذن, an announcer announced loudly, alarmingly, doing something like the adhan. When you hear the adhan, it sort of wakes you up, it shocks you into attention. This is the concept that the Quran is talking about. A wild announcer, yelling, screaming. Who is that person? Remember, أذن مؤذن. Two words in succession from the same root indicate there's a plot, there's some scheming going on. In this case, we're going to see it is one of the siblings. Why do I say this? Again, just be patient and you're going to see the evidence for yourself. So what did this announcer say? He said, "Oh, you with the caravan of donkeys, you are surely thieves. You are surely thieves." So this person, one of the brothers themselves, is yelling about their own caravan, "You guys are thieves." What's going on here? So let's dissect this a little bit. First, how do we know that the siblings were watching Yusuf or Yusuf's fata or Yusuf's servant as he inserted the drinking utensils in his younger brother's travel pack? How do we know that? Well, think about this a little bit and you will get the answer immediately. On the first trip, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the exact same expression, and we learned that Yusuf inserted the stock and trade, or concealed the stock and trade within their personal travel packs. All right, so now what are the siblings expecting? Of course, they're expecting Yusuf to do the same thing. So they're watching out to make sure that he does not trick them again without them catching him. So they were clearly watching him. Any halfway smart person would know that you should watch for the same trap to avoid it. So in this case, he did not put it in their travel packs. He put it in the travel packs of his younger brother. All right, so that's the first answer. Now, another question. How do we know that the announcer was one of the brothers? We said, ثُمَّ أَذَّنَ مُؤَذِّنٌ أَيَّتُهَا الْعِيرُ إِنَّكُمْ لَسَارِقُونَ. How do we know that the announcer was one of the brothers? The answer is, he used the word al-'ir, أَيَّتُهَا الْعِيرُ. Now, if we scan the whole Quran, the word al-'ir is used 3 times. One time in this ayah, and another time in ayah 1282, and another time in ayah 1294. Every single time it gives us a clear indication that this is a locution of the brothers. The brothers use this word al-'ir. The Quran describes them having al-'ir. So this is a confirmation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the narrator, and twice they use the word al-'ir to refer to themselves. So clearly whoever used this word has this word in his locution. I told you, locution is really important. We have to understand in order to break apart all of the complexities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala included in the stories. In this case, it's very simple. You look up the word al-'ir and you only find it at the locution of the brothers and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describing them as al-'ir. So it's a confirmation with 2 janah. So therefore, whoever used this language, al-'ir, is one of the brothers. Very, very simple. How do we confirm this again? Again, because 2 words back to back with the same root, it indicates some sort of scheming, plotting. Now you ask, well, why would they want to do this? Why would they want to draw attention to their own caravan that they're thieves? We're going to see. Those are valid questions. But just because you ask a question and you don't know the answer, it doesn't mean that there is no answer. You have to be patient. You ask the question, you write it down, you think about it, and you leave it. You let it stew, you let it brew a little bit. You think about it, you reflect, you see other evidence, and pretty soon, if Allah wills it, you will get the dhikra. You will get this aha moment, this epiphany that tells you, yes, there is a very valid reason for it, and we're going to see it. So now we ask, why did the siblings want to broadcast the theft? Why did they want to expose their own caravan to the risk of being labeled thieves? Now pay close attention here. Remember, what was their original mission, not the mission that Yaqub gave them. Their original mission, which started really, really early in the surah, is to get rid of Yusuf permanently and to get rid of the second sibling permanently. So now they have a golden opportunity. Watch this. So their best case scenario, assuming that Yusuf is not in a high position, pay attention. So Yaqub understood that Yusuf is in a high position, but the brothers had a question mark. They were skeptical. Perhaps Yusuf is not really in a high position. He's just a lowly person. And in this case, he or someone connected with him stole something and concealed it in the younger brother's travel pack. What if he's just a nobody? He's just a lowly person. Let's broadcast this information, cause an investigation to happen. Perhaps both of them will be caught at the same time. Both of them will be punished with prison or worse. This is the way the brothers thought. So their best case scenario would be to have Yusuf caught in a conspiracy with the younger one. Remember that in the first trip, when Yusuf sent the stock and trade with them without their knowledge, it was a message to Yaqub. So in their mind, he's sending another message to Yaqub with the younger brother. So now they can get rid of all of this mess and get rid of Yusuf and the younger brother and let them be caught with this investigation. So they announced it because they knew that it was not their own travel packs. It was the younger brother's travel pack. So with both of them ending up punished, Yusuf and the younger brother. That was their best case scenario. Okay, what is the second best case scenario? In case that Yusuf is in a high position. Well, they thought, okay, Yusuf is going to rush to defend the younger brother. And therefore, if he does that, they will identify who he is. Or they will have a chance to see who's doing the cover-up. Or maybe cause the investigation to unravel this type of information. All right, what was their worst case scenario? Their worst case scenario would be to get rid of the younger brother, to have him caught red-handed, so to speak, with the stolen items in his travel pack. So they had every motivation to declare the theft so that an investigation actually takes place. And we're going to see in the next ayah, they insisted that an investigation takes place. So let's look at the next ayah. The next ayah, ayah 71. قالوا وأقبلوا عليهم ماذا تفقدون. They, the siblings, took a nap. قالوا, let it brew a little bit. After this announcement, they let it brew. Why? Because the authorities needed time to figure out what's going on. Somebody is yelling, there's a theft in this caravan. They withdrew innocently. They took a nap or, disappeared a little bit and then came back. وَأَقْبَلُوا عَلَيْهِمْ. And then they came facing them, against them. Remember, خَرَجَ عَلَى, against. أَقْبَلُوا عَلَى, against them. They came negating the accusation, rejecting or refusing or denying the accusation. That's what it means. Asking, what is it that you cannot find? What is it you're missing? Notice, they didn't ask, is there a theft or is there no theft? No, they immediately went along with the assumption that there is a theft. What is it you guys are missing? Now, I want you to think, why did they ask that specific question? And the answer is because they don't know what it was called in the language of the people of Misr, the authorities in the market where they were. So they didn't want to blurt out some word thinking that they knew what the authorities in Misr used to call that item that was stolen. They themselves didn't know what was stolen. They saw something being stuffed in the travel packs of the younger brother. They didn't know the name. So the first question is, what is it that you're missing? Sort of innocently asking, but really trying to inquire and trying to push the investigation even further, insisting that the investigation takes place. So this is what we call a false indignation. They came denying and rejecting. No, no, no. What is it that you're missing? Sort of nonchalantly. Again, we've seen this attitude before. And as I said, the reason they ask what is it that you can find is because their name for it is different than what the authorities in Misr named the stolen items. We're going to see a little bit more in Ayah 72. So in Ayah 72, we discover this. قالوا نفقد صواع الملك. Suwa' al-Malik, this is different than as-siqaya, which is the word that's used in here, the drinking utensils. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described it as the drinking utensils, meaning the large cups that people use to gather water and drink from. Those large cups, metal cups usually, are also used for weighing things or measuring things. So it is referred in some locution as the measuring standard. So imagine, you have a liter, or you have a gallon, or you have a whatever container with a specific size. That specific size is called the measuring standard. So the Quran described it as siqaya because that's how the siblings saw it. They saw large cups of something being stuffed in the travel packs of the younger brother. But the people in Misr called it Suwa' al-Malik. Suwa' is an instrument for measuring. So it is referred to as the king's measuring standards. They said, the authorities in Misr said, we cannot find the king's measuring standard. And to whoever brings it forth, وَلِمَنْ جَاءَ بِهِ حِمْلُ بَعِيرٍ, a camel's load, as a reward. As a reward? What do you mean as a reward? No investigation? No, because the person who was giving the instructions is Yusuf himself. He understood what the siblings are trying to do. The siblings are trying to force the investigation to take place. Yusuf wanted to dismiss the issue. Why? Because he's the one who did it in the first place. Why should he carry out an investigation that may lead to backfire against him? So instead of actually responding and falling into the trap of the siblings and actually doing the investigation, he says, no, don't worry about it. Just bring it to us and we will give you a reward. Since when a thief bringing back a stolen item gets a reward? But that's indicating that Yusuf, who is arranging all of these things so far, wanted to get rid of the investigation. He understood what the siblings are trying to do. وَلِمَنْ جَاءَ بِهِ حِمْلُ بَعِيرٍ, and to whoever brings it, a reward of a camel's load. Now, the word ba'ir here, of course, is used in the right way. Himlu ba'ir. Ba'ir means a camel. As we saw earlier, when the siblings were using it, they said, Kaylu ba'ir, a trade against a ba'ir. Well, they were not trading camels, they were trading something else. In that case, they were trading the younger brother, and we explained it 2 episodes ago in this series. So now we have something really amazing happening in here. The ayah starts, قالوا, they said, clearly referring to the authorities of Misr. But then in the middle of the ayah, a new person pops in, وَأَنَا بِهِ زَعِيمٌ. وَأَنَا بِهِ زَعِيمٌ. Who is Ana? Who is I? Who is I am the one who pledges to deliver on this promise. Of course, the promise is the reward of a full load of a camel for whoever brings this suwa, this measuring standard. So who is making that pledge? Who is in the authority to make that pledge? If you remember, the authority, the ultimate authority for setting the laws and for bypassing certain laws by exception only belongs to the king. And we're going to see this in multiple places throughout the surah. So in this case, it's very clearly someone who has the authority to make that declaration. Declaration for what? We're not going to do the investigation for the theft. Instead, we're going to give a reward to whoever brings it back. That type of authority can only come from the top person in the land. In that case, it's the king. We will give a lot stronger evidence in the future, but for now, this is sort of a logical interpretation that fits very well. I promise you, there's a lot more convincing evidence that we're going to see using the linguistics of how this surah goes. And we're going to see this later. I cannot talk much about it right now. We will deal with it in the coming episodes throughout the rest of this series. So this segment in here, this segment of the discourse, is a different discourse by a different person, perhaps within the same scene, or perhaps at different time related to the same aspect, as we have seen so many times before. وَأَنَا بِهِ زَعِيم. This is a different person than those who described what was missing as the king's measuring standard. So I hope this is clear. We will review a few notes and close, inshallah. So notice first that the authorities wanted to avoid having a full investigation. They even offered a reward for whoever brings the missing measuring standard. No questions asked, which tells you that whoever did this was really able to understand what the siblings and the brothers wanted and wanted to counter them. I told you this is a battle of wits going on. And again, how do we know that the king came on the scene? Because he is the one who said, I am the one who pledges to deliver on this promise. Pledges to deliver on this promise. That means he has the authority to deliver, to break the law, so to speak, or to go above the law. And then we're going to see another janah in the future. And we also explained why ba'ir in this ayah refers to camel. As we said, this is something the authorities said. They were not using it in a derogatory manner as the siblings had used it before, as we saw. Here it's used with himlu ba'ir, the load of a camel, whereas before the siblings were using kaylu ba'ir, the trade against a ba'ir, which we described as the dried up excrement referring to their younger brother. And with this, we come to the closure of this segment. I hope it was beneficial. We introduced several things, including the very, very important aspect of the new Zubur in 1266. And inshallah, we're going to see a lot more going forward in the next few episodes. With this, we make the dua. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah laqad ja'at rusulu rabbina bil haqq. Thank you very much for watching. Salamun alaykum.